We spoke with CBS News senior national security analyst Juan Zarate about the significance of the drone strike.
Well, Vlad, I'm seeing a lot of what you're seeing, which is that Jihadi John was under surveillance for some time. This is typical for how the U.S. has utilized what's called ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, largely drones, but other capabilities to track individuals who are targets. And what appears to have happened here is that we had good intelligence allowing us to track him, to have markers on him. We had persistent ISR, as it's called, and when we had confirmation and the ability to take him out credibly and under current protocols, that's exactly what we did. Again, we don't have confirmation yet that this is actually Jihadi John who's been killed, but as you've heard from U.S. officials, they are fairly confident that they hit their target. And the reason they think so is that they were tracking him for some time.
And if confirmed that this is Mwazi and he is killed, how big of a blow is this to ISIS?
I think it's a bigger symbolic blow than it is a strategic blow, Jill. I think the fact that the U.S. Has built some momentum here in being able to target individuals who have harmed U.S. citizens, who've killed them, obviously, the ability to actually track them and bring them to justice has great symbolic value and demonstrates certainly that the U.S. is getting better at targeting and tracking these kinds of individuals. Strategically, not all that relevant, in part because Jihadi John formed part of a number of individuals, foreigners, who are holding hostages and who form parts of the cadres of ISIS fighters, both in Syria and in Iraq, who are able to sort of move rather nimbly and, frankly, can be replaced rather easily. And so it's not a strategic blow to ISIS, but certainly a symbolic and important move for the U.S.
Juan, James Foley's mother has been interviewed by other news organizations, and in those interviews, she seems to indicate that this is more of a symbolic gesture. It doesn't obviously take away the enormous pain that she feels for the loss of her son. But the criticism that she's had is, well, how were they able to capture, or in this case, lead an airstrike on Jihadi John, and for all these months that James Foley and others were held by Jihadi John and his associates, the U.S. and other allied partners were unable to find them. So for those audience members that may be watching and wondering the same thing, from an intelligence perspective, how do you answer that?
Well, I think there are a couple of realities that we have to keep in mind. One is that we've had major blind spots in terms of understanding what's been happening on the ground. The reality, put aside the politics, but the reality is after 2011, we absented ourselves largely from what was happening in Iraq. And so that blinded us to a lot of the developments there. We certainly haven't wanted to be involved in Syria. And so we had very little coverage in terms of intelligence operations and activities there. And so the reality is at the moment that these hostages were taken, we were blind to what was happening on the ground. What you're seeing is an acceleration of our ability to actually use intelligence because we've begun to put people on the ground. We've been very open about that. We've been doing that covertly. We now have more visuals and more drones flying over. We now have coalition fighters flying over. And so the attention level as to what's happening on the ground is much higher now than it was before. It's unfortunately the sad reality for the family members of those who've been killed. But the reality was we were not engaged in Syria then the way we are now.
Do you expect that we'll be seeing more of these types of high-profile drone strikes going forward?
Absolutely. I think you're starting to see an uptick in these kinds of targeted strikes in a way that begins to look like the campaign against al-Qaeda senior leadership that we once saw in the Bush administration and the Obama administration in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. And so the Secretary of Defense has said that there's a 3R strategy, Raqqa, Ramadi, and raids. And I think what you're starting to see is some of the fruition of that strategy, along with better intelligence that allows us to target these kinds of operatives.
And Juan, that was actually going to be my question about those 3 R's. So to explain to our audience members why Raqqa in Syria, why Ramadi in Iraq is so important. And obviously, those raids have already begun. We saw that rescue operation a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, one service member was killed during that. But we've already begun to see raids. And in addition, we've got the Peshmergas taking on ISIS directly in Sinjar province. So explain what those 3 R's are and why they're so strategically important.
Well, what you're seeing in general, Vlad, is a stronger push for counterterrorism activities on the ground. And what the Secretary of Defense has described in the 3R strategy is having to retake physical territory from ISIS. Raqqa is the capital of the Islamic State based in Syria. Jihadi John was struck in Raqqa. Ramadi is the capital of Anbar, the western part of Iraq, where ISIS has taken hold of much of Anbar, and so taking that city back is critical in terms of taking that part of Iraq and the Islamic State back. And then raids, the notion that we are going to use U.S. support to include potentially special operations forces in Syria to enable our allies on the ground, like the Kurds, to engage in targeted strikes and activities, some of which we've seen in Sinjar with taking back that city by the Peshmerga. We still need to learn more about Emwazi, and certainly as we begin to see the arrest of other associates, I think we've seen one just today in Turkey. We're likely to see more information about Emwazi, his background, and what motivated him to fight for ISIS.
That's right, Juan. In fact, Turkish officials do confirm that they've arrested Ain Leslie Davis. He's believed to be an associate of Jihadi John. And so that goes to your point that in addition to stepping up our presence, obviously now we're going to see a lot more of these arrests and perhaps a lot more of these strikes.
Right, and this has a cumulative effect, Vlad. Keep in mind that every time we're able to arrest somebody, we're going to get more information, more fidelity. Every raid we do, like the raid that we did in Syria several months ago of Abu Sayyaf, allows us to collect more information and evidence. We understand the network better. The more we have ISR, drones flying overhead, the more we can understand what's happening. And so if we're in this fight and we're beginning to apply resources and we're on the ground, it has a cumulative impact and allows us to do more in a way that's more strategic and more disruptive to the enemy. And I think you're going to see more of this. You're seeing the Sinjar action. You're seeing our special ops enter the fight into Syria. Arms are accelerated and being sent to our allies on the ground. You've seen European authorities make counterterrorism arrests against the Krekar network. You're seeing the Syrians push back on ISIS. So this is a real strong set of offensives in the wake of an ISIS threat that continues to threaten and metastasize. We saw that in Beirut. We've seen it in Afghanistan. And again, we may have seen that in Egypt with the downing of the Russian aircraft.
Juan Zarate, thank you very much, as always, Juan.
My pleasure, guys.